This lesson is going to be on solving quadratic equations. Now, if you can recall from our quadratic expressions unit or section, that a quadratic in standard form looked like this: ax squared plus bx plus c. Now, we've only been looking at when we have a being equal to 1, but this is still what a quadratic in standard form looks like. And so a quadratic equation in standard form basically looks like this: ax squared plus bx, oh, that's a really ugly x, plus, bx plus c equals 0. That is a quadratic equation in standard form. So we are going to look at how we go about solving quadratic equations. And remember, FFG stands for following. And the first one we're going to look at is actually just a reminder of what we did when we had, or how to apply our zero factor rule. And you're going to understand why we're doing this. So here, remember, if two brackets equal 0, that means one of them equals 0, or the other one equals 0. And that then means that x equals 5, or x equals negative 11. Now, if you are able to go straight to this point, then that's fine. If you don't need to write the top line, then don't write it, okay? If you're able to see the solution right away, you can write the solution directly from there. But if you need it, then of course, then you need to write it. Okay. So now I'm going to show you what we do when we have a quadratic equation to solve. So when we have this, and this is still a quadratic, what we do is we need to factor first. So here, this is just two terms, so you look for HCF. So my common factor is x. And now I have two things that are multiplying to give me 0. So I'm going to have x equals 0, or, and then you can write this step, but if you don't need it, then don't write it. If you can go straight to here where we say x equals 3, that's fine. Okay. Now, some students, and I'm going to explain to you why this is wrong, and the reason why I'm putting this up is because even after doing like examples upon examples, some students are still going to make this mistake. And so this is what you don't do. So I'm writing here like this is wrong. And so the wrong thing to do is students will say, oh, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to divide by x, and I'm going to get x equals 3. So if you look here, we have x equals 3, which is one of the solutions, but you're missing this one. You're missing x equals 0. You've lost a solution when you divide, okay? So I'm going to write here, I'll put it. Now, some students will be like, oh, that's okay. I'm going to have, at least I get one answer. I'll get part marks. No, you'll get no marks. Okay. This will give you 0 marks because you're actually telling me you don't understand what to do. Okay. So when you do something that is incorrect and you might get some correct answers out of it, that's just serendipity. It's luck. You don't get marks for luck. Okay. So don't do that. Okay. Now let's look at this one. Okay. Now here is a question where you actually can answer it in 2 different ways. You don't ever show me both. Please don't do that. If you show me 2 ways to answer something, I'm going to mark the first way and I'm going to ignore the second way. And if you get it wrong, then you're not going to get the second mark if you got it right the second way. Also, you're wasting time. Okay, don't ever answer it 2 different ways. I'm showing it to you so you can decide which method you like. The first one is to put it into standard form. So get it to equal 0. And then our method is factor and solve. So we factor first HCF always. And then we can see that we have a difference of squares. So that's going to go 2 brackets, x plus 2, x minus 2. And then now we have, therefore, x equals negative 2 or x equals 2. The other method Method B actually comes from we take it as it is and then divide by the 3 and then take the square root. And remember, when we square root a number, we always have to attach a plus minus in front of it. And so this x equals plus minus 2 is the same as saying x equals negative 2 and x equals positive 2, because negative 2 and positive 2 is what plus minus 2 means, okay? So there's 2 separate ways we could have done this question. I've shown you both ways in a test or in your homework or in an exam or a quiz. You don't show me 2 methods, okay? You pick one that you're comfortable with. Now, there can be times, let's look at what if we had x squared, or let's do this. What if we had 3x squared equals 15, okay? So if I did this, and I tried method A, so I'm actually going to label this again as method A. So if I tried method A, so if I took the equation and I put it into standard form and then factored out, I wouldn't be able to factor this. Okay, however, this means that the bracket equals 0, okay? Which then I can say, well, then x squared must equal 5, so x must equal plus minus the square root of 5. And remember, you're not going to like work this out and give me a decimal. You leave it as a radical, okay? You don't ever do anything with the radical. You can simplify the radical, but you don't work out and give me a decimal value, okay? Now, if we solve this question using method B, we would obviously have to get the same answer, because remember, in math, if there's 2 ways to do something, they both have to give you the same answer. Okay, so here If I'm going to answer it using method B, then that means I'm going to divide by 3 to get there. And then I'm going to say plus minus root 5. Okay, so you can decide which method you like, which method you're comfortable with, and then just run with it. Okay. Now here, we cannot do what we did in this question, in questions C and D, because if you look at questions C and D, I only had one term with the variable, okay? And it was the squared term. In question E, I have two terms that have my variables, so I cannot do what I did before. So what I have to do here is first put it in standard form. And so in standard form, that means that we have to have the entire expression on one side and 0 on the other, because standard form means equals 0. All right. It also means that it's in the order ax squared plus bx plus c. So that's what we have here. And then the next thing we need to do, I actually want to change my colors so that I can kind of color code my steps. That's step 1. Then step 2 is we're going to factor. So when we factor it, remember we're going to get 2 brackets. I'm going to draw the diamond puzzle over here for those of you who still like to have it there to look at. Remember, we don't mark the diamond puzzle, but this is how we solve it. So there's AC, there's B. So 2 numbers that multiply. Oops, I missed something out here. That's supposed to be a negative 10, which makes that positive. So 2 numbers, I'm just going to redraw this. Okay, so 2 numbers that multiply to 10 and add up to negative 7, and those 2 numbers are negative 5 and negative 2. So in my brackets, I will have x minus 5, x minus 2. This tells me then that I have x equals 5 or x equals 2. All right, let's do one more example. So if we have this one here, so again, we need to put everything in standard form first. So standard form, and now, remember, for us, when we're looking at any factoring, we always look for HCF first. And here our common factor is 3. So we pull out 3. And that's what we have. So now we're going to factor the quadratic. And remember, a quadratic will factor into 2 brackets. I'm going to draw my X or my diamond puzzle over here for us to follow along with. So we need 2 numbers that multiply to 14 and add up to negative 9. Those are negative 7 and negative 2. And therefore, x equals 7 or x equals 2. So I hope from looking at all of this, you can actually see why we did the 0 factor rule first, and then now we brought it all together and used it to solve quadratic. So remember, a quadratic equation in standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c. And when we are solving We don't isolate the square term and divide. Whenever we divide by a variable, we're going to lose a solution, and that's why we don't do that. We factor so that we don't lose any solutions, okay? When we have just one squared term without a linear term, meaning no x term by itself, then we can have, or we do have, two ways of answering, okay? We can either use what I called method A, or you can do what is there as method B. Remember again that you don't do both methods, okay? In a test and in a quiz, I only need to see one way. If in your homework you want to practice both ways and see which one you like, that's perfectly fine, but I don't want you doing two things in a test, okay? And then, of course, when we're solving, we need the quadratic to be in standard form. That means it equals 0. We factor it, and then we solve it. Okay, make sure you have your notes and make sure that you submit them into the Google Classroom.